Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of IOHR TV. A new report by the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion has looked into the impact of Covid-19 on people without a nationality, undocumented people and vulnerable groups across the world. Among the findings, there is the suspension of birth registrations due to the outbreak of Covid-19. Let's hear more about this study from Amal De Chickera, who is the co-director of ISI. Amal, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Tell me more about this report. What are the main highlights?
So when the pandemic started taking root and we realized that it's going to have a deep and long-term and fundamental impact on our lives and on the lives of people around the world, we at ISI started looking at how we can reimagine and adapt our existing work and our existing programs. One of the things that we have contributed is an impact report on statelessness in the time of a global pandemic. And what this impact report does is it looks at, having drawn from our research and our conversations with partners, it looks at the way in which stateless groups in different parts of the world are experiencing the pandemic and its impacts, and what challenges they're facing as a result and what needs to be done in order to address this. And what we found is that there are various patterns. The challenges in terms of access to livelihoods and the very survival of stateless communities is something that's being faced in various parts of the world. Hate speech, discrimination, xenophobia, and racism, and similarly gender discrimination and the impact of patriarchal systems on women in particular, but children as well. Is another kind of issue that we've been looking at. The report also looks at insecurity and detention and the challenges there, particularly where there is a clash between the motivation to protect public health and the motivation to protect borders. And we find that state responses, which are often to prioritize the protection of borders, are deeply problematic in this context. The report also looks at new risks of statelessness that are emerging as a result of the pandemic. This is particularly because we find that in many countries, civil registries are not being treated as essential services, and so people are not able to register their children. So these are all different focus areas of the report. And it has a number of case studies from the Dominican Republic and Malaysia and Kenya and Bangladesh and a number of other countries.
The launch of this report comes at a time when this pandemic isn't over yet, when vulnerable groups are still suffering the consequences of their exclusion from COVID-19 responses. What happens next? Is this report going to be presented to humanitarian agencies and UN bodies?
Yeah, we hope that the report will be widely read and that it will be taken seriously by decision makers in states, at UN agencies, humanitarian agencies, etc. And we remain open and available to engage with anyone who wants to learn more about the way in which stateless people and stateless communities are being impacted. In parallel with the launch of the report, we're also launching our longer-term COVID-19 response. And we've been fundraising to be able to work more directly with partners, stateless activists and NGOs around the world, so that together we can do more to scope out the extent of the challenge and start responding to it from an advocacy perspective. And this includes advocacy to raise these issues with humanitarian actors who would be better placed to provide direct relief to stateless communities. So our engagement on statelessness and COVID-19 is going to be ongoing for the foreseeable future, also with this fundraising effort and the establishment of a fund. And we hope that together with our partners around the world, we will be able to raise the profile of the issue and draw attention to the millions of people who are being left behind because they are stateless.
The report you have just launched has found that birth registrations have been suspended in some countries due to the outbreak of coronavirus. What are the implications of this suspension?
So where we have seen either a halting or a limitation of civil registries, the impact can be very significant, and we may not actually start to feel the impact until a few years down the line. But the impact is always going to be greater for people who belong to minority communities, whose belonging is anyway questioned. And these include nomadic populations, nomadic groups, those who live on border areas, those who belong to an ethnic or religious or linguistic minority, and those of a migrant heritage. And if you belong to the majority and you don't have documents, it's often addressed by the authorities as, here is someone who doesn't have documents, we need to give them their documents. But if you belong to a minority, or if you belong to a group who's not considered to be part of the country, then the authorities tend to approach it differently. And it tends to be, you don't have documents, we don't believe you're from here. And so that completely changes the experience that someone has with the authorities. So when registries are not functioning fully, or when their operations are halted, the impact is going to be disproportionately felt by stateless groups and groups who are more likely to be excluded.
Where have you recorded these cases?
There are a few countries where we've already heard that this is happening. For example, in Bangladesh, civil registration is not regarded as essential, and this is having an impact on the way civil registration is being carried out. In Burkina Faso, in Colombia, and in a number of other countries as well. The way this is playing out, it could actually result in future risks of statelessness, which we will not be aware of until it's too late to address them.
Amal De Chickera, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for being with us for another episode of IOHR TV. From myself, Margherita Kargasaki, until next time, goodbye.